cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yo, I got a lot of shit to say, so I'ma do this every day. I'll be writing things until I'm fucking buried in my grave. 6 feet deep under, but my body won't decay.
Well, welcome to the What They Wrote podcast bonus episode. This is the podcast where we usually sit down with authors and discuss those books that inspire them, but not today. No. I'm Whitney Welsh Gibbs. I am the author of the Lucas Tate duology, Broken Anchors, and the upcoming Land of Frost that's coming March 2025. Yes. And this is my co-host, the bestie above all the resty, the potato to my potato, absolutely.
Cute.
This is Megan Brebner.
Hi.
Hi. See, I caught you off guard with that one.
You did. I wasn't expecting that glowing introduction.
Absolutely. And I'm not calling you a potato, of course. You're gorgeous, but
I am a potato, though. I could be a gorgeous potato.
A gorgeous potato. All potatoes are gorgeous. They're all my favorite.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm just not a sweet potato by any stretch of the imagination. I'm definitely not sweet.
No. A little bit bitter.
Bitter potato.
Bitter
potato? Bitter potato.
Potato.
Okay.
I like
Glad
that.
we got that covered.
Yes. And other things we need to cover are our housekeeping items for today before we start any of this bonus episode, because they are very important today. First and foremost, this is a podcast created by and for adults, which means that there might be some adult language and adult material discussed on this podcast. So if that's not your thing, get the fuck out of here. Also, spoilers. There will be spoilers in this episode. We are talking all things Imperium, Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, theories we have for Onyx Storm. So if you haven't read any of those books, get the fuck out. Doors over there.
Get the fuck out. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
We love you
that's
still,
all we got.
But don't stay.
Absolutely. We love
Come
you.
back
but
after
no.
you've read it.
Absolutely. So with those housekeeping items taken care of today, Megan, what are we doing?
Well, you did mention that we're going to be talking all things Empyrean Theories. So we are going to go over some theories for like Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, some Onyx Storm predictions. But before we dive into that, I actually have a couple questions that I wanted to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know what your favorite books you read, or maybe like just a recap of the books you read in 2024, since we are closing out the year, and what kind of your favorite reads or rereads were.
Oh, that's a good question. I did a lot of reading this year. Well, first and foremost, we read the Throne of Glass series. That was a big thing. That's how we started our year. So that's kind of got us into the mood. Yeah. So we did the Throne of Glass series. I read all of my books this year.
The books
I
that
did
you
a lot
wrote.
of writing. I did a lot of writing this year, and I read all of those. I also read Divine Rivals, which was highly recommended. It was fantastic. I loved it. And so that was one of my top this year. What else did I read? I read The Housemaid, which you actually recommended to me. So that was really fun.
Good old Frida McFadden.
Absolutely. I read Lights Out, which I did that as an audiobook, and that was very interesting. I read Binding 13, which was also recommended to me. It was really good. It was my very first sports romance. So that was really interesting. It was rugby romance. So it was a new kind of genre for me.
Yeah, I feel like that's been really blowing up lately, like the hockey and the rugby romance. I mean, maybe it's just because I haven't been in that like circle, but I'm just now hearing about it.
Yeah, me too. And so I really enjoyed that. I read Bleeding Rose, which was our very first guest book, Kyla. I read, I reread Anne of Green Gables, which is one of my classic favorites. So that was great.
Cute.
I read The Fine Print and Terms and Conditions, which are part of a 3-book series. I have not read the final one, which I think is called The Final Offer, but I will have to put that on my TBR. And then I read Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen this year.
Interesting. How was that?
Yeah. It was really good. It was really interesting. It's like one of the books she wrote as a kid, like a teenager. So it was really interesting.
And what were your favorites out of all of those? Favorite reads?
Oh, let's see. My best reads for this year. I liked Queen of Shadows. That was my favorite of the Throne of Glass series, definitely. What else did I like? I really loved Divine Rivals, like I said. I thought that was a fantastic book. It was really well done.
I remember you saying that the writing was like really pretty in that book.
It was fantastic. If you're looking for like great prose, that is a book to pick up. The Fine Print was my favorite of the two that I read. Fine Print and Terms and Conditions. I really like that one. That's the first in that 3-book series.
Right.
And then I reread Fourth Wing and Iron Flame twice. So, of course, I love that reread. And I really loved reading Anne of Green Gables again. That was really nice. So,
oh, cool. Yeah. That was a good year of reading.
It was. It was a really good year of reading.
Year.
Yeah. Megan, what have you been reading this year? My goodness.
Well, I also read the entire Throne of Glass series. I would say I always think it took us longer to get through than it actually did because it just takes up so much time to get through 8 books, thick books. But when I was looking through my dates on Goodreads, like it really didn't take us that much time to get through. It was just like a couple months, right? To get through 8 books.
It wasn't that bad.
But that did take up a good chunk of time. I remember also trying to reread A Court of Mist and Fury in tandem as I was trying to like push myself through Kingdom of Ash and stuff. So I know I completely reread A Court of Mist and Fury because it's my fave. Apart from that, what did we read? Of course, reread Fourth Wing and Iron Flame twice. I also read The Clinic by Kate Quinn. That was a very interesting thriller. I also read 13 by Steve Kavanaugh, another thriller. I also got an ARC copy of An Irish Summer by Alexandra Page, which was so cute, and I loved that one. And I also read The Housemaid. I read Hooked, and I feel like that was it. It was a lot of rereading this year. Oh, and of course, I read your books. I read Land of Frost and whatever else is out there of the Steel Citadel series I may have read as well. So can't wait for the rest of the world to have that one out. And top picks of all those, of course, was Land of Frost. Not overhyping it, y'all. I like actually genuinely love this book so much. And I also loved Queen of Shadows from the Throne of Glass series.
Right.
Another top one was definitely An Irish Summer. I'm not a big romance, like only romance novel person. Like I need to have some sort of like fantasy element to it. So this one I didn't think I would get into, but it was actually very cute and took place in Ireland, one of our favorite places in the world. So that helped. Yeah. And then of course the rereads of Fourth Wing Iron Flame and A Court of Mist and Fury were my favorites.
I actually love that both of us read separately. We both read Irish stories, like romance in a way stories, because Binding 13 is an Irish rugby player, and he's like I guess they're high school age, college age, whatever. And then Your Irish Summer, what was it called? I'm sorry.
It was called An Irish Summer, I believe. Yeah, An Irish Summer, a novel. Yeah. And
so we were reading these Irish books. If you guys don't know, if listeners don't know, we were in Ireland this year.
We were.
And it was a really transformative time for us. It was wonderful. It was a great experience. And so for us to be reading these Irish books, you know where our brains are at right now.
It never left Ireland. Like my heart and my brain and my soul are still in Ireland. And I genuinely can't wait to go back. It was the best experience of my life.
Oh, it was honestly. So fun. It was so great. So we had a theme there. But yeah, it's been a really great year of reading. I feel like I was like back into reading. I know I went through a slump for a few years. We got back into reading. We've talked about that on this podcast. And it's been a really kind of fulfilling year with books that we've read. There's been some books that, I didn't love, but there were some books that I really did fall in love with and that really shaped, the type of books I was picking up after that. So it was really cool.
Yeah, I think actually now that you've said that, this would have been my first full year reading consistently. Like before I would just read during the holidays when I was home and I didn't have, work or school to think about. Yeah. But this was like, because I at least know I got back into reading last year when we were on our cruise, and that was in like October. So I really only read for like the end of the year last year, but this year was my first full year of reading. And I think I set my Goodreads like goal for the year was 20 books. And honestly, if I really try hard enough, I could finish that goal by next week because I only have a book and a half left to do that, which I've never in my entire life read 20 books in an entire year. So I'm super proud of myself for that.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a great goal and a great thing to accomplish in a year. I know that I started kind of getting back into reading probably a couple months before our trip, but it wasn't like what we were really kind of diving into, fantasy romance, where we kind of got pulled in. And we've talked about that, got pulled into fantasy romance. But I was reading romances and kind of like pulling myself back into like adult reading, because I was very much a young adult reader, and I was gravitating towards those young adult books. And then I brought myself into like the adult category, which I still love those young adult books, but bringing myself into those adult books where they had adult themes and I was able to kind of relate more with those main characters really started last year. And so it's been a great kind of time to start reading again. And you're right, I was consistently reading this year, which is really nice. And it's kind of unheard of, especially when we're all busy.
Yeah, like I can't remember ever leisurely reading for a year straight. That's just crazy. Like I'm thrilled to be on this side of book talk and the book world.
Absolutely. I love it. So let's talk about books that we absolutely love. We're going to move into the Empyrean series now that we've talked about what we have read, because those books we've actually read the most this year out of anything else is
Genuinely.
Fourth Wing. Now, we should tell everybody the first time we read Fourth Wing was at the end of last year, 2023.
Yes.
We picked it up in November, just around Thanksgiving, and devoured both books at breakneck speed. So we really had to pick them up again because we had a whole year before Onyx Storm was coming out. So we've read it twice now in the past, what I would say from October to now. We've read the books through twice again. So they are all fresh in our memories. We are ready for Onyx Storm, and we have some theories here that we want to share on this podcast. That was our main goal.
Overflowing with like theories and thoughts. Like this series has completely consumed our brains for months. And I think we even thought that our first reread this year was going to be our last one before Onyx Storm, because we thought, it'll take us longer to get through because we kind of know what happened. So, it might just take us longer to get through. No, we flew through it probably faster. And
really fast.
And I loved it so much the second time around. Like the second time through was so much more enjoyable for me that when we got to the part where we're like, okay, wait, we didn't slow down enough and catch all the things we wanted to catch. So we had to go back a third time and like really take notes, because we thought we would be able to catch like everything just reading it for vibes for a second time. But no, like we actually needed to comb through it. And I'm still sure we missed so much. Every time I scour the internet, somebody comes up with something that I didn't catch. So this is just a compilation of the biggest things that we thought of, that we noted, because we do have, what did you say, a 32-page doc of 32 theories. Pages. We're not going to go over all 32 pages in one bonus episode. So we did have to pick through our favorites and some of the ones that you guys asked for us to discuss when we put out a blast on social media. So we're just going to kind of give you the top ones that have been occupying our minds, the top ones that we either feel like we have like really surefire evidence behind, or just ones that we really like.
Yeah, and I think that we should note that the really good thing about this book and this book series is that you get something new out of it every single time. So if you were catching stuff that we didn't catch, or if we caught stuff that you didn't catch, go back and read, or we'll go back and read, and we'll probably see it, or we'll discuss it again, because there's so much in these books that I felt like I was reading a brand new story every single time. I was so enthralled. I was just excited to read it. It wasn't boring to me, like so often it can be boring to reread a book.
Yeah, no, it evolved kind of. Every time we reread, like it just had matured in a different, to become a different story with so many layers. And honestly, I attribute that all to Rebecca Yarros being the genius that she is and writing in all of those layers, because they're intentional. There's no way she intends for you to catch everything on the first or even second read through. Like it's designed for you to go back and find these little things. As you find out new information in like reading Iron Flame for the first time, then you go back to Fourth Wing and things become so much clearer. And I'm sure that will be the same when we read Onyx Storm and the rest of the series. And we're going to go back and be like, oh my God, like she hinted at this so early in book one. So I love it.
I'm so excited. Yeah. So the way we've broken down our theories is we've broken them down in categories, our favorite theories from those categories. And we're going to dive in. Now, we will say we are holding on to our main character theories till the end. So if you're hoping for Xaden and Violet theories, you're going to have to go through this episode and listen in, because we've got so much more than just Xaden and Violet and we want you guys to hear them all. And some of them we think are even more important than those little things of Xaden and Violet. We will talk about Second Signet. We're going to talk about all that stuff. We're going to talk about the consequences of Xaden being Venin. We'll get to that. But first and foremost, we're going to talk about these other theories that we think we want to share with you and that have been like really just tearing at our brains. I've been going insane with some of these. Yeah,
I know. We'll text each other at like in the middle of the night and be like, okay, but like, did you catch this line? Or I just can't stop. And we won't even have been talking about it. Like, it'll just be a random thought that comes like into my brain in the middle of the night when I'm trying to fall asleep. I was like, hey, did you notice that character's eye color was kind of weird? Like, we're ridiculous. Anyway, so let's dive in. Tell us about our first set of theories, Whit.
Okay, so our first set of theories is for Brennan. Obviously, we are going to spoil this. Brennan is Violet's brother, and he is back in Iron Flame. He's alive, and so there's a lot of stuff that goes with Brennan. And I will personally say, I don't like Brennan. I don't like him at all. I haven't liked him since the minute he walked on page. So I'm not trying to be biased because I read through. After the first read, I didn't like him. Second read, I was like, okay, let's see if I like him. Didn't like him. Third read through, convinced of why I didn't like him. So, I mean, I wasn't trying to be biased. I had an open mind when I walked into it. He just rubs me the wrong way. So let's talk about these theories. Yeah. The first one I have down on my list is Brennan. Obviously, why we don't like him? He's bad. He's just not that good. He's being portrayed as this good guy, right? He's working with the rebellion. He's part of the rebellion and their council. Brennan's bad. Let's talk about this because I am convinced of it beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yes, there are definitely lots of hints to this in the book. So we'll pull through a couple of them.
Yes. One of my favorites, and I'm going to pull my book up, my trusty book. I have both of them sitting here, and we have been serious about this. We have tabbed completely so that I can find these for you. There's a quote in Fourth Wing. If you have the paperback, you can follow along with me at 346. It's at the very beginning of chapter 28, and it's talking about the war games, and he's saying winning the war games isn't about strength, it's about cunning. To know how to strike, how to understand where your enemies, your friends, are most vulnerable. No one stays friends forever, Mira. Eventually, those closest to us become our enemies in some way, even if it's through well-intentioned love or apathy, or we live long enough to become their villains. Why the hell is he writing this?
Yes, no, that's crystal clear to me. Like, if nothing else is. That, and by the way, that not only was on page 346 in the book, but if you're following on Kindle, that would have been on page 441, because for some reason we have to have different page numbers between books and Kindles just to make, our lives harder. But yes, no, that's a huge indicator because we know our girl Rebecca Yarros loves to foreshadow. And it's sometimes it's in a very vague way. And I think, honestly, like the epigraphs, I think she calls them, like the excerpts at the beginning of each chapter tell us so much. Like these little sentences, little phrases, I think are telling us the entire story in the background. So you have to pay attention to those. Yeah, I think this is a huge indication that Brennan will be, if not is already, bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the first time we're hearing from him. His Book of Brennan is kind of our first snapshot of him in Fourth Wing before we even see him, before he's back. He's supposedly dead. And these are our first snapshots. And this is what Rebecca chooses to give us, is him saying, you might become a villain to your friends? Really? No, there's something more to him than that. And just the fact that he would openly say that, there's a lot going on there. Some of the ones that Megan caught, maybe you want to talk about this one, was in Iron Flame.
Yes. So this one stood out to me, and I wasn't sure why to begin with. The quote is, Brennan was always a brilliant strategist, according to our mother. And that's found on page 32 in Kindle of Iron Flame and page 19 of the book of Iron Flame. And alone, this sentence isn't much. Like, okay, he's a brilliant strategist. But I think she's telling you, like, he's in the long game. Like, he is planning 25 steps ahead. Like, he is not just a war strategist, like, oh, battles. Like, no, he is planning something. He has an ulterior motive. He has a long game happening. And I think that's important because I'm pretty sure that quote, or at least that insinuation, comes up multiple times about, oh, Brennan was always mom's favorite. He was a brilliant strategist, or he was always a brilliant strategist. So I believe him when he's predicting how long we have until the Venin are at the doorsteps. Like he was predicting 6 months while everybody else was predicting a year. And she was like, I believe Brennan because he's a brilliant strategist. So I think there's definitely, that's a hint to something deeper in his character that could insinuate that he's got something else planned for everybody.
I think so too. And something that stood out to me in Iron Flame, I'm going to pull it up because it's longer than the little snapshot of a quote that we've put in our notes. It'll be on page 38 in Iron Flame on the Kindle and 24 in Iron Flame in the book. Now, with a caveat of that, we have the UK version of the paperback. So if you don't, it might be a little bit further on. Let me see.
That is true. I forgot this one's the UK paperback. I don't even think we have a US paperback yet. So these page numbers may be off.
So it's talking about Brennan taking Violet out to see Andarna at the beginning of Iron Flame. And it talks about Scale seeing Brennan. And it says, Scale snarls at Brennan, baring her fangs and taking one threatening step in his direction, her claw fully extended in a series of sharp talons. Hey, that's my brother, I warn her, putting myself between them. She's aware, Brennan mutters. Just doesn't like me. Never has. Scale likes Xaden. Xaden, who is morally gray, she actually liked him for killing somebody. That's what Xaden says. So it's not like she is not ruthless. She's actually known for being ruthless. It's not like she doesn't like kind of harsh people. She likes Violet, who sometimes I don't even like Violet in this book. But she likes her, and she hates Brennan. And why would she hate Brennan? Like, that says a lot to his character, at least for me.
Totally. I mean, our girl, she knows how to notice somebody's character. Like, even though we know that Scale picked Xaden after he killed somebody for bullying Garrick at Threshing. Like, we know she's okay with things that are done for the right reasons, even if they maybe weren't the best things, but knew that the intentions were right. Almost like Xaden, who knows people's intentions. It's almost like Scale also has a way of detecting people's intentions. So I actually wonder if there's a connect there. That just came to my brain. But yeah, if Scale
is rolling around now.
I know, right? Always. If Scale doesn't like him, I don't like him. I trust her.
Absolutely. Which brings us to our next kind of theory that goes along with Brennan. We're still sticking on Brennan right now because we have a few theories with Brennan. Is our theory about Brennan and Naolin and what happened there. We know that Naolin was Taryn's rider before Violet. We know that he was at the Battle of Aracia with Brennan when Brennan died, and he sacrificed himself or gave up his life in some way to save Brennan. And everybody thought that it didn't work. Obviously, Brennan's alive, so something happened. And so we have a theory as to what happened with Brennan and Naolin. We've seen a lot of theories about this, about why it was significant that Naolin gave up his life for Brennan. People have said maybe they were lovers, we don't know, but we do have a theory that I haven't seen tons about, so let's talk about it. And this theory is Brennan pulled from the earth during the Battle of Aracia, and Naolin tried to siphon that power back into the earth to save Brennan, and it killed him. Now, that's a lot to unpack. So let's talk about this, because that's a lot to throw out there here. But we really do believe that something had to have happened, and Brennan pulled from the earth. So this kind of piggybacks on Brennan being bad, because we know that people that pull from the earth are generally bad. Don't come at us with Xaden. We'll talk about that later. But we know that Venin pull from the earth, and that Naolin is a siphon, or was a siphon. He wasn't a mender like Brennan. Brennan was apparently, according to records, shot in the chest
with an arrow, I believe, right? Yeah.
With an arrow by Fen, a Ryerson. And so, in order to save him, Naolin apparently tried to use his power on Brennan. Now, we can't figure out why a siphon would use their power to fix somebody that has been shot with an arrow. Shot in the heart.
We racked our brains over that one. We were genuinely no, if anything, Brennan would be able to save himself before
Save himself.
Naolan could save him by siphoning him, which
Mhm.
leads us to believe that maybe it wasn't the arrow to the heart that he was dying from, or something else very dramatic, like pulling from the earth. So that also kind of like, it's hard because we have two different points of view on this. We have, okay, why would he be pulling from the earth? We do know that Brennan likes power. It said a couple times that he likes power.
Mhm.
And there's either the idea that he was his last resort was to pull from the earth. Maybe he realized he was losing the battle between him and Fen, if that's what it was, and he just needed to pull whatever power he had for the first time, channeling from the earth, and maybe that's why Naolan was trying to stop him, or maybe he had already started to pull from the earth and he was trying to siphon that ground energy from him, hopefully putting it back into the ground. But there's also the idea that Brennan's done this before, and
Mhm.
maybe this was kind of predictable. Like maybe Naolan expected him to do this because maybe he had been Venin already, which takes us to kind of like these two theories that kind of go together. But there is the chance that Brennan was already Venin before this whole thing with Naolan happened. But I don't want to jump to that yet unless you're done talking about the Naolan side of things. Was there more you
No,
had to say on that?
No, I think that that's a good place to go. I do want us to remember what a siphon does, though. A
Yes.
siphon's main ability is to take power from something, siphon it, and put it somewhere else, redistribute it.
Yes.
That's why we see Sloane at the end of Iron Flame. She siphons the power from Violet's mom, Lilith, into the Ward Stone. You have to take a power and put it into something, redistribute it. There is actually really nothing else that a siphon does. So
they can imbue. We know that they can imbue,
yes.
But I'm not sure how that would also have helped. Well, we have a couple thoughts actually, but I'm not sure how that would have helped Brennan directly, resurrect from an arrow to the heart.
From an arrow to the heart. It doesn't make sense. So let's keep that in mind, and let's talk about Brennan and the possibility that he has done this before, that others know that he's done this before, and how that kind of plays into this theory that we have.
Yeah, and why even we think that he could be Venin now. Because if we assume that he pulled from the earth successfully, he would have to be Venin right now. So what evidence do we have that he could potentially be a Venin? Well, we do have answers for that.
We do. Because we actually don't know of any Venin cure. We're told that there is no cure. So even if he's siphoned, he still should be Venin, honestly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this. So Meg, do you have any sort of supporting evidence that Brennan might have been Venin before this Battle of Erasia?
Well, evidence from before this Battle of Erasia is, I think, pretty slim. It's more of just the thought. I mean, we talked a little bit about the fact that maybe, see, then we're getting into like Papa and Mama Sorrengail. So I'm trying to like just stick to the Brennan ones.
That's okay.
But because then we get into like all different other piggyback theories. So just evidence on Brennan being Venin, period. Like what we know now, like in the times we interact with Brennan, we have lines from Violet like, he must have been in a hurry because I can't see him anywhere. And that's when she has her first talk with Brennan after waking up in Erasia for the first time. And he's like, oh, I have to go to an assembly meeting, like finish eating, I'll talk to you later. And she's like, wait, I don't want to be left behind. Like Brennan dips and like seconds later, Violet runs after him and he's gone. So we know that speed is a Venin trait. So that is one indication, because it's just also very why mention, oh, he must have been in a hurry. Like it's another one of those Rebecca Yarros lines where you're like, that probably means something. So I think that that's an indication that he is Venin. And I think you also had a couple other quotes about Brennan and his thirst for power.
I did. So I pulled one up from Fourth Wing, page 264 in the paperback and page 335 in the Kindle. It's that little excerpt at the top from the Book of Brennan. And initially when you read it, you think that he's talking about that first rush of power when your dragon channels to you. But I wanted to talk about the way that he says it. The first rush of power is unmistakable. The first time it forms to you, surrounds you with a seemingly endless supply of power, you'll be addicted to the high, to the possibility of all you can do with it, to the control you hold in the palm of your hand. But here's the thing, that power can quickly turn and control you. And I really do think that this speaks to his obsession with power and his obsession with being in control of that power and having more power, because we know that dragon power is not infinite. We know that you can burn out. And I know that from this tells me he is very addicted to the power that he got from his dragon, or wherever he's getting it. He's addicted to that power. And you have to be really careful with the people that are addicted to power. Everybody who we've seen in this story who's addicted to influence and power in some way has gone bad.
We do know this.
So that one really stuck out to me. And I'm going to pull up another one from Iron Flame. Let me grab my book. Again, we are in these little UK paperbacks. So if you do have the UK paperback, it's on $7.59. If you just have your Kindle, it's on $8.77. So let me just pull that up. Okay. Now, let's talk about about the Venin. And, well, at least we believe we're talking about Venin here. It's from a missive from Lieutenant Colonel Nolan Colbercy to General Lilith Sorrengail. And this is, again, at chapter 66 in Iron Flame. That is Xaden's chapter. And it says, "We have tried every method we know of, as you requested. There is no cure. There is only control." Now this, I'm not convinced that this was written within this time frame of Iron Flame. I am convinced that this was written beforehand to Lilith. So something was going on where she wanted a cure to what I believe is Venin, and that there was no cure for it. We know it. I could pretty fairly say this is about Venin because this is Xaden's chapter when he has already pulled from the earth. And so we can say that. And it's talking about that control of the power that is racing through you. And we know that this power is addictive. This Venin power. We hear Xaden talking about it at the end. Even still, I feel that need to pull from the earth, even though he doesn't want to, after he's pulled the first time. So there's that desire. It's an addictive power. And we've seen Brennan, who is talked himself about how he's addicted to this power. He needs that power. He craves that control.
You know, when something is mentioned more than once in a Rebecca Yarrow's book,
pay attention.
We know we have to pay attention. This is not something like maybe once you could be like, okay, maybe that was a coincidence. Right. But if something's said twice, better write it down.
So let's talk about this more and why we think that he is pulled from the earth. Now, we don't see that, and we don't see that he's done it ever. But we do firmly believe that this has happened before Brennan went to the Battle of Varrish. We believe that it was when he was with Naolan. That was not the first time that he pulled from the earth. And perhaps he pulled from the earth during his younger years. And the reason why we think this is because of, one, that need for control. He wrote about it in the book of Brennan, which we know he wrote while he was at Basgiath. But also, there is a sub-story that we know nothing about in Fourth Wing. It is why Violet has a mark in her hair, why her mother was sick, what happened before Violet was born, or when her mom was pregnant with her, to cause such havoc on the whole family.
Yeah.
So,
because we know something about a sickness. We know that, Lilith mentions, when I was pregnant with you, the sickness came and da-da-da-da-da, whatever she says about that. But we have a thought as to why this could happen. And Rebecca Yarros has said that this will be addressed eventually. But what fun is it to wait? We want to know now. So we have a thought that would tie this all in together. And that would essentially mean that Lilith had come into contact with a Venin while she was pregnant. Why would we think that? Well, we know at the end of Iron Flame, Dane tries to stop Jack Barlow.
Yeah.
He grabs Dane's arms and tries to drain him. Then when he gets separated from Dane, he has gray fingerprints or marks in the shapes of his hands on Dane's arms. So we know that if you are touched by a Venin with an intent to drain, I would imagine, that you are left with a mark. Now, we obviously don't know of any evidence of a mark on Lilith. She keeps pretty covered up from what we know. We don't see a lot of her skin or notice really any thoughts of that. But we do know that Violet came out with partially grayed out hair. And to me, that's a huge indication that there was some sort of interaction with a Venin. Well, what could possibly interact with Lilith, what Venin would have interacted with Lilith, because at this point, they're really not at war. They're not having direct confrontation with Venin back when Violet was in utero. So what situations would happen that would cause that? And we think it was Brennan. We think somehow, some way, Brennan pulled from the earth, became Venin at probably a very young age. We would imagine if Lilith is pregnant with Violet. How much older is Brennan than Violet?
We've been
Probably, like,
theorizing 8 years or more.
Okay. Yeah, so he would have been a
somewhere around there.
kid. And we think that could have, well, both parents would have known. Obviously, if Brennan pulled from the earth, both parents, Papa Sorrengail and Lilith, would know about this. And we think potentially that's when they started looking for a cure to Venin. Potentially that's where Papa Sorrengail's research started, in trying to figure out how to cure Venin to help save Brennan. And obviously the fear of how Violet could have come out if she was coming into contact with Venin in utero.
And something that I think that isn't talked about a lot, but that is important to note here, is that I don't think Lilith knew what was happening a lot with Jack Barlow. So I don't believe that this letter was written to her during the time that Jack Barlow was being, like,
healed or whatnot by Nolan, because that's what it's
Yeah.
trying to insinuate in this position. It's trying to say, oh, this was sent from Nolan to Lilith right before we're about to talk to Jack. So it's insinuating, oh yeah, this was written when he was trying to mend Jack. But I don't think Lilith called for that mending to happen. I don't think she had anything to do with that. That would have probably been more of Colonel Ados or Varrish that were doing that. So why send that letter to Lilith?
It's a very personal missive as well. It's personal. It's not to, like, the leaders of Basgaiath or to the king or to General Melgren or to that. It is to Lilith from Nolan, who they have known for a long time. He's taken care of Violet for almost her whole life. He's been healing her since they've lived at Basgaiath, as far as we know. And so it's a very personal thing. It's something that Lilith really cared about as she was looking for this cure. So it's something that she really wants to find, and she would care about that for Brennan. Brennan is her favorite. They talk about it a lot.
We do
Brennan's
know
her
that.
favorite.
And it would honestly probably also support just how close Nolan and Violet are. We know that Nolan's been mending Violet since she was little. She trusted Nolan with every fiber of her being going into this. So we know they had a close relationship growing up. And honestly, maybe that also had to do with Lilith wanting to keep tabs and make sure Violet wasn't developing any further Venin traits. So I think her and Nolan have been close for a while, trying to keep an eye on the kids.
I think so too. And I think that became like the center of their life. Now we know, when we're talking about Violet's hair, I thought about this as you were talking about it. When they talk about Dane's arms, after the fact, when they heal, I think it's Riddick had to heal his hands after because of the dragon fire. Was that during that same scene? Maybe not. But they healed somebody.
Oh, yeah. He touches.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because he was holding up the ice.
Yes, he was holding up the ice. Yeah.
Ice, and he had burns on his hands. And he showed his hands to Violet, and he said they were healed before, we were even in battle. And then she said, and what about Dane? And he said they couldn't heal it. They couldn't heal those marks. Well, Violet's hair, no matter how much they cut off, that gray, that silver is still in her hair. And it's that same color as that Dane's arm is now. It's like that wrinkled, like, gray color of his arm where Jack has now drained him. So we know that it's lasting. It doesn't matter if her hair is short or long. It's still going to be there. And we haven't seen anything else that comes even close to that, besides these marks that Dane has.
That don't go away.
That don't go away. So that's something to remember. And I think that it really did throw the Sorrengail family into some turmoil when Brennan, as we theorize, first pulled from the earth. And I would imagine it was pretty young. What is he? Like we said, 8, 9
years
10
old.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And it's very possible that he had no idea what he was doing. Maybe he had full idea what he was doing. They knew these stories. They're one of the only people that know these stories about Venin. And their dad was telling him these stories. So he would have maybe known. Maybe he was curious, as kids get. And, maybe he pulled from the earth.
Could have been something, on the playground. Like, in theory,
Sure.
like maybe some kid was, bullying him or something to where he felt like he wanted power. I mean, we could theorize about that forever. But the final thing that this whole Brennan theory ties into that is number one suspect, and we don't have quite all the information we need for it, but it's definitely something, is the rune on Brennan's hand.
The rune.
The rune-shaped scar on Brennan's hand that Violet mentions when she sees him for the first time. There is a rune-shaped scar on Brennan's hand. Well, why would somebody have a rune-shaped scar on their hand? A couple different ideas to play here. First of all, if it's a rune-shaped scar, is it an active rune? Like, could somebody have, like, can you, weave the rune and, like, put it into his hand? Like, is that something that's even possible? We don't know. Or is it a scar from coming into contact with a rune that, let's say, if you have, like, one of those stones that the marked ones have, I don't know, is that an elevated rune? Like, is it elevated? Is it like carved in? We don't really know, and we don't know what those limitations are, but perhaps he put his hand on a rune that reacted negatively towards him and caused a burn on his hand. So there are a couple different, like, physiological explanations for this, but what could that rune be?
And there are solid theories for that. So first and foremost, we know that runes can leave a lasting mark. The relic on the marked ones is from the rune itself. So we know that it can leave a mark. We also know runes can be put into almost anything. They're in architecture. They even put that heating rune into a piece of wood, which I thought was a very bad idea.
Very bad idea.
But you have that, both sides of that are very possible. I am curious what it is because it's brought up, and it's the only mark on him that is brought up. We get his description. We don't get a mark on his chest, so somehow where he was shot. We don't have any of that. We have a rune-shaped scar on his hand. Now, I would probably theorize. I have two different thoughts on this. Now, I could go with they gave him a rune to keep him from pulling from the earth if he is Venin, and he's done it before to keep him in control, because we know that runes are for a specific reason. They are not weaved only decoratively. We are told that very specifically. And that's where I lean towards, that he has this rune to keep control, because he needs control. He has no control at all, which is a big thing in these books, is the control that either your dragons have, you have, the power has, whatever. It is a big theme in these books.
It's a huge theme in this book, especially Iron Flame.
Yes.
But yeah, I feel like that's our leading theory, is that this rune somehow prevents him from either wanting to pull, like getting that urge to pull, or to stop him physically from pulling. Like somehow that stops somebody from pulling from the earth, which is very interesting in and of itself. First of all, who put that rune there? We do have theories. Consider, maybe that was what Nowlin did when he was trying to save Brennan. Could it have been Lilith or Papa Sorrengail? Maybe. But we agreed that it would have had to have happened after he died, because there is never any mention of a rune-shaped scar. Like, it's like Violet seeing this for the first time. She's not being like, oh yeah, that good old rune-shaped scar. It's like, looks new. So it has to be somebody that did this after he died. Unless he did it himself. I don't know. But it is a huge question mark we have going into Onyx Storm, and we want answers.
And I question that as well, and I just thought about it. He is a mender. When he mends, there are no real side effects. The scar that Violet has on her side is very minimal silver scar. It's not a big, huge scar across her side, and they mend almost to perfection. Why would he have a full rune-shaped scar on his hand as a mender? It doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense.
It just doesn't make sense to me, unless it's there for a purpose. And it has to be there for a purpose, because she's bringing it up.
Yeah,
Rebecca?
right. Rebecca, we're on to you.
But that really does bring us to, why does he need it? Was trying to keep him from it. We know that Tears are pretty much the only ones that weave runes at this point, or, you know, some people do, but we know Tearish people, that's where it comes from. That's a culture that has runes. So it could possibly be that that's the only way he's on the council, is if he has his rune on his hand.
That's a
we
good
don't
point.
know anything. Yeah, we don't know anything about Naolan, besides the fact that he was a writer before Violet and died. So we don't know. He might be Tearish as well.
Ooh, what if, who's the instructor that teaches them runes?
I was trying to think of her name.
It is one of the assembly, right? Is it Suri? Is that her name?
It's not Suri, it's the other woman.
It's the other one. Okay, well, anyways, she's part of the assembly. So maybe she's the one who had to put that rune on Brennan's hand, because I like that idea of, like, if you want to, like, swear fealty to us in Orisha and, you know, stay here, like, we got to make sure you're not going to just, like, flip the script on everybody. So perhaps that she did that. That is a very, very good point.
Yeah.
That's
and we know that it has to have a growing list, 33 pages now. So there has to be a reason. I do believe fully in my heart that Brennan is bad. I do believe he is Venin.
Oh, we missed like the biggest one too. His dragon. He has an orange dragon. And any time we meet a character with an orange dragon, they're no good. So, I mean, who else we have? Varrish had an orange dragon. Jack Barlow had an orange dragon. Doesn't Dane have an orange dragon?
Dane has a red dragon.
His is red. Okay. Who was the other orange one? We have it on
think
here.
Dane's dad has an orange dragon.
Oh, yeah.
I believe. Right? I believe so.
So we do know that Brennan has the orange dagger tail. Yeah. Oh, Amber Mavis. That's the other one who had an orange dragon. Amber Mavis. Yeah. She was the one who was killed in Fourth Wing for allowing all of those unbondeds into Violet's room to try to kill her for her dragon. And that's when, you know, Xaden comes in, saves the day, all hot and handsome with his shadows. And Amber Mavis is the one who ends up getting executed after that by Tarn.
You will be forgiven for thinking it was Dane, because that's Dane's very good friend.
Right. That was the connection. I knew it was somebody else that went bad.
But yeah, let's talk more about this, because if we know he's bad, if we know that, or we believe that he is Venin, let's talk about the family and them knowing, specifically the parents. Now, Violet wouldn't know any of this, obviously. Mira wouldn't know any of this, obviously. I could see where the parents would want to keep this from the kids. But let's talk about the parents.
So we mentioned earlier that Papa Sorrengail's research may have been started because Brennan was Venin. So, I mean, we know a little bit about Papa Sorrengail's research, but it is a big question mark leading into Onyx Storm. We know a couple things like, well, per Varrish, that it was Varrish, right, that said this, that Papa Sorrengail's research had to do with feathertails. So we know that he was looking into feathertails, and Colonel Ados and Varrish both say that, because I believe Varrish says, Colonel Ados told me that your father was writing about feathertails, but funny enough, we can't find that tome anywhere. And now all of a sudden you're bonded to one. Like, isn't that odd? And she's like, I think you mean a coincidence, which, you know, goes into another theory of what feathertails have to do with, you know, anything, but perhaps they have to do with the cure to Venin. Maybe there's a reason they disappeared all these years ago, and maybe there's a reason Andarna was waiting to hatch for the right time to defeat Venin again. So that's a big idea, is that this research has to do with obviously curing Venin, but, you know, what better time to start than when your son has somehow, you know, turned himself into a Venin by pulling from the earth. So that's a big one. And I think Mama Sorrengail was involved in it. I think she probably asked him, you know, go start looking up how to find a cure for this. Like, especially since she was touched, she was pregnant. She was probably worried about Violet. Like, you know, find a way to save our kids. Maybe, unless they wanted them Venin. But that would be very odd. I'm not sure why they would want a child to be Venin. So we have that, and we also have the note that, or the thought that Papa Sorrengail's research is potentially written in Tearish. And this is something I thought of when they start talking about how Violet knows Tearish, and she assumes Brennan knows Tearish as well, because she talks about, you know, back when Dad was trying to teach us all these languages and stuff, he taught us Tearish. Like, of course, Brennan knows how to translate it. That's why he can probably translate Warwick's journal, even though Brennan claims he did not know Tirish. And we know Mira didn't, because Mira said she couldn't sit still long enough to pay attention.
Well, I will correct you on that. He did not know Lucerish. He does know Tirish.
Oh, is that what it? Okay, he does know
Yes.
Tirish. Okay, so it was Lucerish he didn't know, but Violet knew Tirish.
Mhm.
What were they trying
both know
to-
Tirish.
They do both know Tirish. Okay.
Yes.
So I think that they both know Tirish because Papa Sorrengail made sure they knew Tirish, because he only wanted people that spoke Tirish to be able to one day read his research, because we think that he was on that side of everything. We think that he may have been pro Tyrandor and trying to make sure that this information did not fall in the wrong Navarian hands, which would have been, you know, Colonel Adoses of the world, the Varrishes of the world, who would have done things, very bad things with this information, and why he's intentionally hiding it from them. So I believe he taught Violet and Brennan Tirish so they would one day be able to read his research.
There is something to say about that, because most people don't know how to speak Tirish. They don't know how to speak any of these dead languages. We know
Right.
that Moranian is spoken by Jacinia.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Dane and Violet speak Lucerish. But even people that should know that language, because they're from those province, don't know it. We know that Sawyer should be speaking Lucerish. He doesn't speak Lucerish.
Mm-hmm.
Most people know sign language, but not everybody knows sign language. So they're not up and on to all these languages. Markham was somebody that I think that Papa Sorrengail was really worried about. Even though Violet spent a lot of time with him, there are many cases where she talks about, or we see in a letter, where he says, be careful who is writing this information, be careful who is telling you this story, look at your sources, because that's important. So I think he was really on to Markham when he was alive. And so I don't know if Markham speaks Tirish. I have no idea. I would think as the curator, he might know these languages, but he might not. And he might have been trying to hide this research from him as well.
That's very, very possible, especially since he talks so much about, you know, the scribe quadrant and, you know, being careful of the information that you read there. Like, he obviously spent a lot of time in there doing his own research and his own studies on everything, but he didn't want every old person in the scribe quadrant and in the archives to be able to read his work for a reason, or find it, it seems like.
Or find it. We don't know where it is. We haven't been told by Violet. She knows where it is. She knows exactly where it's at, but we have not found that out at all. We haven't seen it. So it has to be hidden for a reason. There's a reason why he would go to those lengths. It would not be far-fetched to think that he wrote it in a different language that only certain people could read. Yep. I think that's fair.
I think that's...
Let's talk about this, because if we have these theories, we haven't really plotted out everything. We still have questions for this, and we do have questions about Papa Sorrengail. We don't know, was Papa Sorrengail good, and was he just doing this to save his son because his son was Venin, or he was really worried about Navarre and the Venin coming to Navarre? Was he good, or was he Venin? Was he bad? Was his research something that was not good? It wasn't benevolent. It was, something that he was using against everybody else. We don't know, because we do know that the scribes in the scribe quadrant aren't necessarily good. And we'll talk more about that. But we know that there's something going on there. So he could have very possibly been in that. We just don't know that either.
Was he involved? Did he help orchestrate, this infiltration of Venin into the scribes? I could see a scenario where, if what we theorized prior is true about Brennan becoming Venin, I could see him as a father trying to do something to cure Brennan and accidentally, turning himself into Venin as well.
Right.
Like, there are many different scenarios in which this could happen. And it's also a very loose way to say, like, oh, is he good or bad? Like, I feel like there's so much gray area in this series of what is good and what is bad. We honestly really don't know much about who is like on the right side and who is on the bad side. Right. So yeah, what side was he on? What was his motive? And
another question we have is, who is Papa Sorrengail? That is a big question.
Who is Papa Sorrengail? This is the biggest question going into Onyx Storm.
Yes, we don't know much about him. We don't know his name. We don't know very much about him. We could have already potentially met him in one of these writings that we've seen, because there's a few of those characters that wrote some of these little excerpts at the beginning of these chapters that we don't know who they are. We know who many of them are, but we don't know who all of them are. And it could possibly be him. Is he a Sorrengail? We don't know. There's some times when Violet says things and her mom says things that make me believe that maybe he's not a Sorrengail. There's a line in there that Violet says, she says, don't you know all Sorrengails are writers? Was he a writer? As far as we know, he's a scribe. So if all Sorrengails are writers, is he a Sorrengail?
That means, does that either means he's not a Sorrengail, or at some point he was a writer, we're going to take this very literally, which you should. Because it's Rebecca Yarros, and she says everything for a reason.
And how did he die? We have so many questions about how he died. It says that his heart failed. It talks about his chest pains. It talks about that. Did his heart fail? Was he killed because of what he knew, what the research he was doing, or maybe if he was very against Markham and the Scribe Quadrant and the archives and everything that was happening there? Was he murdered? We don't know. What we do know is Violet's mom absolutely hates the Scribe Quadrant. She hates it.
We do know that.
She said, no daughter of mine is going to be in the Scribe Quadrant. And she was very adamant about that. And she talks about it, multiple times. She doesn't trust them. And so there has to be a reason. Even though her husband was a scribe, she says that very, very clearly. She says, that is bullshit. The love of my life was a scribe.
Yes, so that's a totally contradicting statement to me. Like, she hates everything about the Scribe Quadrant, but the love of her life was a scribe. So what happened here? Like, was he always a scribe, or is there something else? Like, we do hear so much about, Sorrengails are writers. Like, you have to be like the rest of the Sorrengails. But why would it be such a crime if she was in the Scribe Quadrant if your husband, her father, was in the Scribe Quadrant as well?
Yeah.
Lots of questions.
So there's a lot of questions there. So there are things that we still don't know. So our theories come from what we can see and what we can theorize based on what we're seeing, but we still don't have all the answers on him. He's somebody that I really am hoping we get more answers on in book 3.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I think we will. And, we couldn't finish our theorizing on the Sorrengail family if we didn't also mention a couple teeny tiny little theories that we do want to mention going into this, and then we'll kind of move on to different theories in the universe. But one, we do have a Mira theory, and this one is, very loose, but it is a line that was said that, got us thinking this is probably going to happen. And that's the fact that Mira will probably die, first of all, and she's probably going to die of poison. And this is just like one little teeny tiny line that I will actually read to you. Okay, so this line is in Iron Flame on Kindle, page 288. Violet is talking to Mira, and she goes, "Fucking show off," I mutter. "Is there anything you don't excel at?" "Poisons," she answers. So Mira says, "Poisons." Flicking another dagger at the target. "Never had the aptitude for them like you and Brennan. Or maybe it's just that I could never sit still long enough to listen to Dad's lesson." And then she moves on with the conversation. Again, it's a small little thing, but the fact that she very quickly says, "I am no good at poisons," makes me think that that's foreshadowing that she will succumb to poison. Now, whether that's a poison-tipped blade by a venin, or the poison from a scorpion tail, or she is poisoned by one of the many poisons that we hear about when Violet is trying to win all of her challenges, and that Brennan also poisons. Could it be Brennan that poisons Mira? We don't know, but this is just a small little theory that we have on Mira going into the rest of the books. And another one we have is that Mama Sorrengail, Lilith, is working with the rebellion. And this is starting to become more and more clear to us as we get through Iron Flame. And all of a sudden, Lilith isn't looking too bad. Like, we know, obviously, that she marked Xaden's back up with 107 scars. But at the end of the day, she still fought for them to survive and have a chance in the quadrant. The exchange between, giving the marked ones a chance in the quadrant for Xaden to look out for Violet, they already have some sort of relationship. I think it goes back even further. I think back during the rebellion, I think maybe she wasn't wholeheartedly, pro Tyrandor, but I think there was a part of her that did not want these kids to die. And I think she was involved in perhaps even Colonel Mary, so Liam's mom, weaving those runes on the stones that we know ultimately turned into the relics on the marked ones. We do think that Lilith Sorrengail was a part of that. We think that she didn't want the marked ones to die. She didn't want the kids to die. And she probably didn't honestly want to watch their parents die either. But we think there's more to that.
I think so too. I was going to pull up this Fourth Wing quote that really gets me. Like we said, these little excerpts at the beginning tell us so much about this, what's going on in this story, probably more so than you could even imagine. And she's writing a letter to the king during the Tirish rebellion. She's giving like an official brief. And she says, I know I'm in direct disagreement with General Melgren's orders. I'm officially objecting to the plan set forth in today's briefing. It is not this general's opinion that the children of the rebellion leaders should be forced to witness their parents' execution. No child should watch their parent put to death. This is a big one for me because she actually, I would imagine, would have been the one that executed the rebellion leaders. We know that it was all the leading officers that were executed by Melgren. I believe that this would have been her mom, Violet's mom, Lilith, that was doing the execution. I don't think Melgren would have done it himself if she would not have objected to it. I feel that's what she was objecting to. And it doesn't make sense to me unless she was really against these people dying or these kids seeing their parents dying, that she would go against this. This is her actually objecting to orders from the top general in Navarre. And we don't see her do that like ever. And we don't see her, her orders from Melgren are solid throughout this whole entire book. Like she leans on the codex, she leans on Melgren and what he says. She kind of goes along with everything. But she didn't go along with this. And that is super important to me.
Yeah. And not to mention that same energy continues when they're in that meeting in Iron Flame. They have that meeting with, all of the leadership of Navarre and Arisha. So then you have Team Arisha over here, and they meet up to talk to General Melgren. And she takes a moment afterwards to talk to Mira and Violet and says, hey, there's something wrong with your wards. Why would she bother telling them that if she wasn't a little bit on, Arisha's side of things? Like, there's still a part of her that for some reason is on that side, even though she stands firmly and publicly on the Navarrian side. Besides the fact that it's her kids. Like, I don't think she would just completely up and like betray Navarre just because her kids were necessarily over there if she didn't already have some stake in the game. Not to mention, she also says in Iron Flame when they're down by the Wardstone, she says, stay alive, Violet, or else this will all be for nothing. That was then, right?
It was when she's being saved from the prison cell.
Oh, that dungeon. Yes. Okay. So when she was downstairs, she says, stay alive, or this will all have been for nothing.
For nothing.
What? Well, all of what have been for nothing?
Right.
I think she's been trying to keep, obviously, Violet alive for a much longer, deeper purpose than just the fact that it's her daughter. Otherwise, she would have that same energy trying to protect Mira, even trying to protect Brennan, not putting them on like necessarily front lines of things. Like she would be putting a little bit more effort into protecting them if it was just a mother-child bond.
And in that same quote, when she's talking to Violet and she says, stay alive or this will all be for nothing, she looks at Xaden because Xaden says, do you regret putting me in the quadrant yet? And she says, no. She says no. Even though she knows he's stealing from them, he's stealing those daggers. She asks him point blank. He says, yeah, of course I am. I'm the one stealing them. And she still doesn't regret it. Why? Another thing that came up for me in that same sort of breath was when she was talking to them after that meeting between the people of Varacia, the leadership of Varacia, and Melgren and all of them. She says, do you not think that I would know where my kids are? She knows that they're in Aracia. She knows. She knows so much more. Who is telling her?
Yeah.
Melgren doesn't even know where they're at. And she says, do you think I don't know where you guys are? And she knows where the other wardstone is out. She knows that they've tried to put up the wards. So
she knows a lot more. Yeah, she knows a lot more than she appears to know. She's going to be very important. I'm so sad she's gone. I'm sad she's
No, I
dead.
really ended up liking her.
Isn't that crazy how you like really dislike this woman the entire series up until her death scene, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, brilliant. She's brilliant.
Yes, and I was crying my eyes out.
I actually really was.
On that note, let's talk more about our theories and like move away from the Sorrengails. We love them, but let's move somewhere else. Let's talk about Venin, because we have a lot of theories about Venin, and this is obviously the central point of the story. These are the big baddies. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about our biggest theories. We had a lot, and we did cut it down to our biggest theories of this category. Let's start with Cat and Venin. Maybe not one that we've heard anywhere else, but one that we are pretty convinced is true. And this was one of Megan's like favorite theories, one of hers, that she would die on this hill.
I will die on this hill.
And it is that Cat and Tecarus are Venin.
Yep.
Tell us about it.
So this started with the theory that Cat is Venin. And I'll kind of tell you I'll tell you where this whole thing started. In fact, everybody follow along with me. We're gonna go to Iron Flame. I have the paperback, and we're gonna go to the beginning of chapter 47, page 554 in the UK paperback Iron Flame, or page 643 in the Kindle. Now, we can pretty much say, I think there was only one other instance that I forget off the top of my head where it was, but there was only one other instance that we noticed that the excerpt at the beginning of the chapter did not have a direct correlation to what was going on in the chapter.
Yes.
For some reason, this just stuck out to me so much. I believe during the second read through. Beginning of chapter 47, the excerpt says, defeating a Dark Wielder begins with knowing where they rank in age and experience. Initiates have reddish rings to their eyes that come and go depending on how often they drain. A Sim's eyes fluctuate in degrees of red, and their veins distend when riled. Sages, those responsible for initiates, eyes are permanently red, their veins perpetually distended toward their temples, expanding with age. Mavens, their generals, have never been captured for examination. This is from Venin, a Compendium by Captain Drake Cordella, the Nightwing Drift, which Whitney pointed out to me. I didn't even catch this. Who is Drake Cordella, real quick, Whitney?
That is Kat and Serena's cousin, who gets confused for their brother in the book.
Which is interesting in and of itself, because this whole theory is going to be about Kat. So this chapter is the chapter where Kat and Violet are fighting, and Kat starts to use, her flyer magic, whatever that is, the mind work to enhance her feelings of, rage, jealousy, all the stuff we hear about in the beloved throne scene. What does that have to do with Venin? This whole excerpt is about Venin, and I read this through and through. So if anybody wants to prove me wrong, prove me wrong. But other than the fact that we are dealing with a fight between Violet and a Venin, I don't think this excerpt has anything to do with the chapter at all. So that leads me to believe that Kat is already a Venin. Okay, what else do we have on that? Well, we know that this goes into your theory a little bit, so I'll wait on that one. But we know Kat, first of all, is very powerful. We know that she has this mind work. We know that she can enhance, people's emotions, but we also know that she is very quick to pick up on runes. And runes become very, very important later on when talking about, obviously, the wards and the wyvern, because when they go back to check on the wyvern carcasses, when Violet and Mira go back to check the wyvern carcasses, there are runes in the wyverns that are still humming with power. We know that Jack Barlow left runes of some kind around as a lure to get the Venin to go to lead the Venin to Basgath. And we also know there were lures used at Resin as well. So we know Venin have a sensitivity and a calling to certain runes. That's what they're using to communicate with each other, to lead each other in different directions, and somehow how they are powering the wyvern. And when they are going through all of the rune classes together, Violet and Kat and all the riders and flyers, Kat is picking up on all of the runes super quickly, and she's very, very good at them. In fact, they always ask her to, work on the runes, etc., etc. So besides that excerpt being from her cousin who wrote that, just a funny coincidence for who we're talking about, and the fact that she is, first of all, very strong for a flyer, very good, very powerful. I think she's a Venin. Oh, also, we know that the barons, which are outside of Peromil, right? Check my geography, were drained. And they happened to skip right over Tecaris's, what is it called? Corbin, which is where Kat was, and Tecaris. And we know that the Venin took over the flyer school. That's why all the flyers were uprooted over to Corden. Mm-hmm. So we've got a lot going on here. What if the Venin, blew through the barons, blew through the flyer school? Maybe they made a deal at the flyer school. Maybe they infiltrated the flyer school and, people started turning Venin to join them and flew back to Corden, where they said, okay, well, this will be your little safe haven if, join our side, and we'll let you keep Corden, which we know is a completely indefensible property. When Taryn and Violet get there, they talk about, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, but you can't defend this. Well, if the Venin completely blew out the rest of, the barons and Peromil leading up to that, why? How did that not get destroyed? Well, maybe they all agreed to turn Venin in order to keep their city. And in that case, Kat and Tecaris would now be Venin.
I think that you're onto something. The thing is, we read this chapter 47, about 8 times through after we read this, because we wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything that was about Venin or anything. This is fully them fighting in that scene and Violet kicking the shit out of Kat and almost killing her. There's nothing in this scene that mentions Venin at all except for this very first little excerpt. And that just doesn't happen. That's a big thing. One of the things I think is weird as well is that, yes, they're indefensible. She leaves. And the one thing about Peromil that we know is, and this could be why she's so strong in and of itself, but that they have these crystals. I'm going to try to find it. I don't know if I marked it or if I just,
I know you put...
I put a mark for it. It's highlighted it. I know.
Yes, it's on page 38 in the Fourth Wing book.
Got it. So, when Violet is walking across the parapet in the first book, she's calming herself down by reciting these facts. What a nerd. I love her so much.
Love her.
And she's talking about the kingdom of Peromil. And it was something that really got to me, was that it says, and I don't think I even thought about it the first time through. I'm probably not even the second time through. It says, the kingdom of Peromil mainly consists of arable plains and marshlands and is known for exceptional textiles, endless fields of grain, and unique crystalline gems capable of amplifying minor magics. Now, I think this is why Kat is so, in and of itself, powerful. I think she's using these crystals. We see crystals again in Peromil when they get that luminary. It is blue crystals. It's huge, and it's blue crystals. So we know that these work for minor magics. I don't know what that extends to. I don't know what minor magics mean. Is it Venin, power pulling from the earth? What is it? We know mind work is part of that. We know speed is part of that. Something that Venin have is like an ability for speed.
Right. And but so that's also a lesser magic.
Yeah. So is all of it lesser magic? Is it amplifying her magic? Is it making her more powerful? I don't know. But it makes me really worried for Violet and for everyone at the fact that these are something we pass up, but it's something that's very important to Peromil as a kingdom. And it's something that's just kind of like glazed over. We don't really look at it. We don't talk about it. And it was something that stood out this time.
It did. I completely missed that all 3 times, so I'm glad you caught on to it. When you told me you had a theory about crystals, I'm like, have we ever read the word crystal in this book? I literally forgot any mention of crystals ever. So that is my big theory on Kat. I could honestly probably go on for much longer, but you guys get the gist of that. Moving on. What do we have next?
Let's talk about the scribes because we've noted this before, but the scribes in the quadrant are not good. We've heard this multiple times. Let's talk about them. Our theory is they've been bad for a long time. If anybody has read that little excerpt from Onyx Storm, we know that there are Venin dressed as scribes. Now, this is very important to where we are going with this, so I want you to remember that. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's in Cosmopolitan. It probably is still in Cosmopolitan. But the scribes in the quadrant, in that little excerpt, well, the Venin are dressed as scribes. Now, the first time I noticed this after I read this again, there was a line in here that I want to read to you. It's an Iron Flame. And when I went back to read after I read that little excerpt, I couldn't help but think about this line, and it just did my head in. It's on page 293 in Iron Flame in the paperback, 344 in the Kindle. So if you're following along, please follow along with Kindle unless you have this book, because you'll be very confused. But 293. So they are trying to think where we're at this moment. Oh, they had just escaped from the challenge where Violet and her squad were locked into that room, and they had to escape, and they didn't drink the water, so their signets were not taken away from them. And different cadets are coming up to them and saying, hey, you guys got out, how did you do it? First of all. But it's in that same sort of scene. So Violet says, a scribe cadet walks by, but I can't see who it is with the hood up. That's odd. Usually they're only in the quadrant for death roll or whenever Markham needs extra people. They are in the rider quadrant, which nobody is allowed. There is a whole thing in here when we see the infantry that goes to assassinate Violet during threshing. We are told that nobody is allowed in the rider quadrant. Scribes are allowed to come in during those 2 times, either with Markham or during death roll. That is it. No other people are allowed in. That's why Mira has somebody, a scribe, sneak in the little Book of Brennan into Violet's bunk. So they're the only people allowed in, but it is a very odd moment where they are walking around the Rider's Quadrant just any old time. So something's going on there. That's first and foremost. That was one that really stood out to me in our last reading, but we have a lot of evidence that scribes are not good. We know scribes can be bribed. Mira says that in that scene where she writes that little letter and says, I stayed until I knew you could cross the parapet. Then I had this scribe take this and put this underneath your pillow. They can be bribed. They're not good. We know that, obviously, we've talked about it. Lilith hates the scribe quadrant. She cannot stand them. She doesn't trust them. We know Markham is bad. We know that they are changing texts in the quadrant. Not only do we know this from the fact that the fables are missing from the archives, but we know that Jacinia is very excited in her naivety that they are translating these old books and they're putting them into the common language, the Navarian language. And she wanted to show Violet all the work that they've done. So we know that they're taking things out of these books. We know that they're hiding information, and you have to check your sources. Papa Sorrengail tells us so many times that he is a scribe. He works in the archives, and he's telling us you have to check your sources. Some of your sources are not good sources. You always have to check who is speaking in this, which leads me to believe that scribes are not very good.
There's definitely an infiltration in the scribes. Like, I'm sure there are some that are innocent. We can hope that Jacinia is one of those who seems to be figuring this out all at the same time. That there, there's redacted information, there's missing information, there's mistranslated information. And we see that in these excerpts, how they go from translation to translation. It even says redacted for academic consumption. We know that there are inaccuracies. That's the whole point of how they find out that, the Venin, the fables of the Venin are gone. We also know that it was dad or mom. What was this quote from? It says scribes who hold all the power. So scribes are the ones who hold all the power. We know that. That one's in Iron Flame, page 20 in the book, page 33 on Kindle. And it also plainly tells us, I believe this is Xaden who says, consider the archives enemy territory. Now, sure, of course he's going to say that, but maybe that's like a bigger hint that there is more enemies. There are more enemies in the Scribe Quadrant than there are friends. They're enemy territory. That's when I believe Xaden's trying to talk Violet out of going and including Jasenia in her research.
Right.
So there are just so many hints that there is an issue within the scribes.
And we can't trust them. That is the one quadrant where I am pretty positive you can't trust 90% of the people. Now, there are a few exceptions, like you said. We're hoping Jasenia is one. We are hoping that...
Very much so.
We're hoping that the scribe that is with them in their field test is one, because I actually really liked her. But
right.
It's a personal reason why I am hoping. But we know that most of them can't be. We know that going on there, and I think it's been going on for a long, long time. And not just when, we know this. We
know stuff started disappearing from translation. I think she says like 400 years ago is when things started to go missing. And lest we not forget, the entire series is written essentially by Jasenia Neilwart, which is at the very beginning of all of both Iron Flame and Fourth Wing, where it says the following text has been faithfully transcribed from Navarian into the modern language by Jasenia Neilwart, curator of the Scribe Quadrant at Basgath War College. All events are true, and names have been preserved to honor the courage of those fallen. May their souls be commended to Malak. So we can only hope that Homegirl is to be trusted. Otherwise, this entire book is not to be trusted. Also, who we believe to be her mother was the scribe who sent the report about Brennan being shot in the heart. Wherever that one is, I know we have it written down somewhere, but in that excerpt at the beginning of the chapter, it says, I believe her name is Sorella Neilwart, which we can assume is a relative of Jasenia's, if not her mother. And we don't believe that he was shot in the heart. We don't believe that that's how, definitely not how he died. And that's what they're saying. He fell by being shot in the heart by Fen Ryerson. As we talked about earlier in this podcast, we do not believe that was the case. So we can probably assume that Sorella lied or was forced to lie or whatever it is. But we know that they write the event. So she is not to be trusted either, which makes me so nervous about Jasenia and where she lands on the whole trust spectrum. But we're just going to have to let go and let Yaros on this one and see where that sends us.
Let go and let Yaros. I
let
love
go
that.
And let Yara.
No, I think you're right. And I think that there are good intentions. Like, I'm fully convinced Sorella Neilwart had good intentions when she was writing. She was the field scribe for the Battle of Erasia. So we know that. And we see her a few times in Iron Flame. Not see her, but we see her excerpts. We have no idea where she's at. I keep asking Megan, I'm like, where is this woman? Why have we not seen her?
Yeah, like she doesn't, like Jasenia never talks about her mom. Like, Violet's known her for so long, but she never says anything about knowing who her mom is or where she's at. So what the hell happened to her?
Yep, we don't know. But I believe that, obviously the cover-up of a lot of things that happened in Erasia. Erasia didn't burn completely to the ground. That was written by Sorella that it did. So she could have good intentions, but there are scribes that don't have good intentions. So there is a gray, like we said, there's a lot of gray areas in this book. That is one of the gray areas, but I do believe as a whole scribes are bad, and we should be very careful and leery going into Onyx Storm about trusting them. That's something that we've learned, especially when they brought in Varrish into the series in Iron Flame. It was very clear at the very beginning that Varrish was not good, and he could not be trusted. We didn't know the level to how terrible he was. His introduction is really at, well, we see him briefly once, but then we see him after Parapet, at the first formation after Parapet, and his dragon burns like half the quadrant. What was his
second squad or something like that? Just gets like wiped off the map.
Yes, and so he's very bad. That's our introduction to him, and you're like, oh, I don't think we want to be around him. And then come to find out, and this is completely, I don't even think this is a theory. I think that this is just fact. He's Venin.
Has to be.
has to be Venin. He talks about controlling his dragon. Xaden will not touch his hands. Now, there was a point in which I was wondering whether or not Xaden could read the intentions of Venin. It was confirmed when he was talking about the Venin, and Violet says, "How do you know that?" And he says, "You don't want to know how I know that about his intentions." So it was confirmed that he can actually read the intentions of Venin. But when he first meets Varrish, they're passing the missives. Varrish passes the missives for Xaden and Violet to Xaden to pass to Violet, and Xaden very, very intentionally does not touch his hands. And Venin drain, so I would imagine that he was worried about being drained, and that was a big tell for me. Also, Varrish is killed with an alloy dagger.
Little sus. And I didn't realize that until you pointed it out to me, because I think I remember when we first talked about this, I was like, oh, but he wasn't like, but then they killed him. Like, but then we reread, and Dane did in fact have that alloy dagger.
And yeah, and let's recap in case you missed it, because it is easy to miss. They bring Dane into that cell, that holding cell that they have Violet in. It's that whole moment where he actually reads her memories on purpose. He puts his hands on her head, and she drags him into her memories. And she's like, okay, let's go. Cool. Let's do this. If you are going to read my memories, if you're going to be this way, let's do it.
I'm going to show you exactly what I want you to see.
Exactly. And right after he does that, right after he touches her, he sees everything. Varrish hands him the dagger, the alloy dagger that Violet had. And he looks at it, and Varrish tells him, "This is what they've been stealing. This is what they're stealing from our college and our wards, and keep making us defenseless." And he says, "This is the exact same one that was in her memories." And with that dagger in his hand, he stabs Varrish. He stabs him. And it was one of those moments where I was so intently reading the second and third time through, because I wanted to make sure that I was onto something here. And it was. They talk about the fact that he never puts this dagger down. It's the same dagger that he uses. And so he was killed with an alloy dagger.
Yeah. So it's very possible. Like, it's very, obvious, honestly, that it was the tipping point. It's like, okay, if we had any question of whether or not this dude was Venin, that definitely put the cherry on top. Not to mention, even Violet picks up on a couple of things. There's a quote in Iron Flame, page 158 on the Kindle, 129 if you have the UK paperback, where she says, "Varrish saunters towards me, his arms locked behind his back, and the Major must be inhuman because there's not a dot of sweat on his high forehead." Like, miss, it's literally right there. She's saying he must be inhuman.
Yeah.
He's Venin. And we also hear about later, she says something about, and Varrish seems so controlled. And then we hear about how Varrish, what is it? "Maybe you struggle," Varrish snips, losing his customary slick indifference. "Some of us do not bow to the whims of our dragons. In fact, we influence them." So we know that there is a recurring theme in Venin controlling their dragons, which we could get into a whole different conversation on dragons versus wyverns and when that whole situation happened. But the fact of the matter is, we know Jack was a Venin, and we know he talked about controlling his dragon. Like, oh, look how easily I can control my dragon and slit its throat. Right. Like, what? And then Varrish dares to say the line about influencing his dragon. Like, it's just very, very clear that this dude was Venin. And he was also pretty important in the grand scheme of things, he was Dane's mentor. So now we get into questions of what exactly did he mentor Dane? So we can go on and on and on about that. But we know for a fact that Varrish was Venin.
And it's interesting because he is leadership in Navarre. I mean, he's been brought down, a token. He's been brought into Basgiath because he is too violent for Samara, which it's very questionable why you would bring him into a war college rather than leave him at Samara or just get rid of him. But he's leadership. And that begs the question, has there ever been other leadership that is Venin? Is there ever been other leadership that have been working with Venin? I mean, we can theorize Colonel Ados. We can theorize other people. But is there anybody that was maybe high up that was Venin? Who knows? It's possible now.
it's very possible. We kind of already talked a little bit about some of our rebellion theories in earlier conversations. Like we talked about, Battle of Arisha and whatnot, but there is another rebellion theory that I know you and I have talked about a lot, and it starts with a big question that comes up in Fourth Wing. For those of you that caught it, I think most of us caught it by like the second or third read, but at some point in the Battle of Ressen, right before Liam dies, R.I.P., he wields ice. And what the fuck is that? Because we know his signet, and his signet is, what is it called? Farsight? Nearsight? Farsight. There you go. So he can see from far away. We know nothing about him being able to wield ice. We also know that that's not necessarily a lesser magic because it's Riddick's signet. So we know that ice wielding is a signet, but why the hell is Liam wielding it? Okay, so that starts begging the question, do more of the marked ones have more than one signet? And could it be coming from the Rebellion relic? Because we know that the Rebellion relic on their arm came from the runes on the stones that Liam's mom wove and gave to them when their parents were burned in front of them. The heat from the dragon fire activated the stone, the rune in the stone, and that's what caused the tingling in their arm, and all of a sudden they had these Rebellion relics. We know that that rune was a protection rune, and Xaden at some point says, this particular rune was meant for somebody in my bloodline. It was only meant to be used once. But we also know that this rune is extremely, extremely complicated because they say that nobody would be able to make that nowadays, that Colonel Mary was the last one to be able to do that. What could be so complicated about a basic protection rune? So there's more to it. We think that there's more involved in that rune that turned into the relic. And perhaps that means that they were given a little, like maybe a second signet. Maybe they all got an additional power or stronger signets. But if Liam's just out here wielding ice for no good reason, then perhaps more than one marked one. Because I don't think we know much about... Do we know anything about Liam's dragon's previous owner? I feel like you had a thought on this.
We don't. I have theorized that maybe a relative was the writer before, a direct relative, only because Sloane knows a lot about it because it was in that letter from Liam. But I don't know if that's true or not. I do think that there's a lot about that relic and that protection that was given that even the marked ones don't understand. Yes. I think there's more to it because we see things about that kind of extend beyond just that simple protection of, it's supposed to counter, the only thing it's supposed to do is counter the signet of the rider of the dragon that executes their parents. So by that, they should not be able to be seen by Melgren, which we know, but there's other stuff that happens with it too. We know that relic is very important. We know it's going to come up. We know that every single one of them has it, including a baby that was born with it.
From the womb, she comes out with the Rebellion relic. Good old Julianne.
And she was not holding the rock as far as we know. How could she do that? And every single one of them was holding the stone in their hand, and that's why it goes up their arm. So we know that that's where that relic comes from. We know we don't understand that magic, why they would have this relic, why it became a relic rather than just a protection. We've never seen, besides maybe that rune on Brennan's hand, we've never seen a mark from a rune on anybody else. So it begs the question, is there more magic that they just don't even know? And could it be a second signet? Could it be a enhanced lesser magic like speed that, comes up? Because we know Xaden's very fast.
We know Imogen's very
fast. Yeah. And so what else is this Rebellion relic giving to them? What other protection did Colonel Mary's magic give to them? And, when it was activated, under what circumstances did it need to be activated? It was the heat of that dragon fire, or the dragon fire that activated it. Were the kids executed and survived? Do we know this? Because if their parents... Did they attempt? Because it says that the Rebellion relic, Xaden tells us, now it could be part true, that Rebellion relic happened at the execution when their parents were executed, but it says that it was activated. He also says it was activated by dragon fire. So did they come into contact with Dragonfire? Was it just that hot? What happened? Were they executed? There's a line where Melgren is talking to Xaden and telling him he needs to go meet Malik. And he says, tried that already. He didn't want us, remember? Work. And itches on his relic. So I believe that maybe that's a question we'll get answered. Did he try to execute them? There's a lot we don't know about what happened in that time. Violet didn't know that Liam's dad was executed.
Yep.
During that rebellion. So we don't know. There's a lot that's there.
Maybe they so what if Melgren tries to execute the children? They're holding the rock, so obviously they survived the execution. Melgren's like, UTF, what the hell happened? Realize that perhaps the runes were created. Maybe they don't even realize it was the mom, Liam's mom, that made it. Maybe they assume it was the dad, and that's why they go hunt down the dad afterwards and kill him later, because it's said that Liam's father was not killed there at the same time as the rest of the parents. They went and found him at his house or whatnot and killed him there. So maybe that's what made them kill him, is they're like, oh, he must have, made these runes, and that's treason going against the execution. So now you're going to be execued too. Very possible.
Very, very possible. We just don't know. And there's so many questions that bring us to that, as in, like, why the hell was Liam wielding ice? That was a big thing. Why does that happen? And it seems so intentional. It couldn't have been with Rebecca Yarros, how she writes. It can't be a mistake. No. It really can't. She would have come out and said that was a mistake. We're going to edit it in the next version of the book. It would have been edited by the paperback. It was not edited in the paperback. It is there. So enough people have talked about it. It means something. But that's what I have on the rebellion and their theories. There's a lot going on there that I think even Xaden is going to figure out, and he's going to have to know.
Yeah, and how much of this do people already know? Do our characters already know? Like, how much did Lilith know about those rebellion relics? Did she, if she was in on making those runes with Colonel Mary, does she know what the relics actually hold? We don't know. So we will have to find out a little bit more about that one in Onyx Storm. The next theory I really want to talk about, I want you to talk about, because you are the one who finally came up with a possible answer to this. And the question being, what the hell is Garrick's signet?
This has been a question that so many people have asked. This has been a fan question. This has been something that has been theorized. We don't know what the hell Garrick wields. He's such a big part of this whole story. We know everybody else in this main group, what they wield. We even know Bodhi counters signets. We know this stuff. We have no idea what Garrick has even done, what he's doing. So I've been thinking a lot about this, and it's been driving me nuts because, one, I love Garrick. I think he is just wonderful. I love him. And two, he's a mystery to me. Also, Rebecca Yarros, in an interview, when asked who she would want to be stranded on a desert island with, she says Garrick, unequivocally Garrick, for reasons we don't know. Just so quick, off the mark to say Garrick. And I'm like, okay, so something's up with Garrick. It has to be. Well, I was deep diving, as we do, and a few things stood out. So in Fourth Wing, Violet is looking over at Xaden after threshing when they're all sitting there, and Imogen is finally talking to the first years because they finally matter because they have dragons. And she's trying to discreetly look at Xaden over her shoulder because, now she's a little bit into him, but also they're connected, they're bonded. And she's watching him up at that table with all the executive officers, with Xaden up there as wing leader. And Garrick is sitting up there, and he is the first to notice that she is very slyly kind of looking over her shoulder. And he looks really sad as he's looking at her. And he's, she's saying, was he sad because, now I'm tied to Xaden, and now Xaden's life is in jeopardy because of me, but the fact that he's the first, he notices immediately that she is the one staring at them, and he meets her eyes, and they have this moment. And I thought that was weird. I was like, why would he even notice? Nobody else has noticed her looking, and she's being sly. It's not even I just turned and stared at him and was trying to get his attention. No, it was I'm kind of peeking over my shoulder. I'm trying to have this moment of where I'm just kind of looking at Xaden, and then it gets written by Garrick. That was the first moment where I was like, something's up with Garrick, and texting Megan and what is up with this guy? Why is he noticing Violet? Also, Garrick's dragon is really sensitive to runes. It's the only thing we know about his dragon, really. We know the color, we know its tail type, but he's really sensitive to runes. It's one of the things we learn in Fourth Wing. It's probably one of the only things we learn about Garrick and his dragon in Fourth Wing, besides the fact that he's besties with Xaden, is that he obviously sees Violet looking over her shoulder, and his dragon is sensitive to runes, has a sensitivity to runes. Well, not much to go on there until you get to Iron Flame, or you get to the re-release of Fourth Wing, which came after Iron Flame with Xaden's POV. So I'm going to go to Iron Flame first, I think, because it was the first thing we read after Fourth Wing. When they get back to Basgayath, after they leave Eratia at the beginning of Iron Flame, they're standing there and Xaden is telling their story. And Lilith is standing up at the front and they're telling their story to Lilith, and Violet has to corroborate this story. And she's standing there freaking out. And Garrick leans over to her, has to be Garrick, and he goes, "You need to breathe or else you're going to pass out." Why does he know? Why is he aware that she is not breathing? Is she turning blue? What is going on with this girl? Is it that obvious? Or is he just really observant? And in this moment, I think he's really observant. He's the one that leans over and says, "Breathe." And so I was like, okay, something's going on. Later on in Iron Flame, his facial expressions match Xaden's mood. When they come back from that attack, they go back to Eratia after that attack. And then, once again, we are told that his brown scorpion tail is hypersensitive to runes. So I was sitting there thinking, what is wrong with Garrick? Why? Why does Rebecca Yarros want to be on a desert island with him? And the final thing clicked into place. I read the Xaden POV in the bonus chapters in Fourth Wing after he is on the mat with, I believe this is after he was on the mat with Violet, and Garrick's giving Xaden a hard time. And Xaden says to Garrick, "Sometimes I hate how fucking observant you are." And all the alarms went off in my head. And I went, I've got it. And I am convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Garrick, his signet is hypersensitivity. Whether it is super observant, hypersensitive to moods, hypersensitive to what is going on around him, he is hypersensitive. That would make him good at hunting. It would make him really resourceful. It would make him aware of things, which Xaden needs when he needs that information. He needs somebody near him who is hypersensitive to what is going on. And Garrick, I believe, is that person. I think he has hypersensitivity.
I think you're totally on the nail on this one, because when we were looking at all the evidence, like we had, I couldn't figure out, okay, but like I kept going back to, why would Rebecca want him on a desert island? Like, what would that do? Like, if he but it makes sense. Like, if he has, like, let's say super good hearing, or can kind of like hear thoughts or emotions, maybe he can hear an animal that he needs to hunt, or maybe he can, hear if, somebody else is inhabited on this island. So like, it just makes sense. It'd be an all around great trait to have and a great power to have. So I think you're on the nail on this one. Whatever this hypersensitivity looks like in a signet, that's what he's got. Maybe he can wield ice too. Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Everybody wields ice.
I know we have a couple other little theories on some of the rest of the writers. Like, one thing that we'll touch on briefly is on Imogen, and this one came up when I was obsessively writing a chart of everybody's eye color, because I am just so sure it comes up all the time. Anytime Rebecca is describing a character, anytime Violet is describing a character, I guess, the eye color is mentioned, and it's just so prominent. So on this last reread, I kept a list of every single eye color and character mentioned with an eye color or trait. And on top of that, we saw Rebecca release a reel, an Instagram post. And in this post, she is showing off her new bookshelf. You guys are actually going to probably think we're crazy about this one, but just come along for the ride. She's showing her bookshelf and she's like, I just got, my copy of Onyx Storm. She's here. She's beautiful. And then she's, talking about like sprayed edges, blah, blah, blah. And then she goes, and look, it fits right here with the rest of the family, and she puts it next to a copy of Fourth Wing and Iron Flame.
She fits right here with the rest
She,
of the
yes,
family.
you're right. She does say she. And she fits right here with the rest of the family. Fine, that might not be nothing, but a couple things we know about Rebecca Yarros. 1, she does everything with intention. 2, she's a huge Swiftie, and we know that Taylor Swift leaves these crazy Easter eggs in all over the place, and we know Rebecca loves that. So we were peeling this video apart with a fine-tooth comb, trying to figure out, what does this say? Like, what is she telling us? Like, it's just so intentional. She stops. Oh, not to mention, she fits right in with the rest of the family. What does that mean? Okay, put that off to the side of your brain. You're going to lose us here. She's also wearing green jewelry, right? She's wearing a green ring on her ring finger. And what, a green necklace? Is that what the other one is?
A green necklace, yes.
A green pendant
not
necklace.
Her normal wedding ring. It is replacing her wedding ring. She has never worn any other wedding ring besides her normal diamond wedding ring. That day, she is wearing a green stoned ring on her finger in place of her wedding ring. And a green necklace.
And a green necklace. So, we're starting to play around with things. Well, could this green be like resembling somebody's eyes? And when we're thinking of the line fits right into the family, we're like, okay, maybe she's trying to tell us that there is some sort of Easter egg about families, that there is somebody in a family that we don't know about yet. And who could she be talking about? And so we look at her jewelry and we see this green necklace and we're like, who has green eyes in this book? We know Imogen has pale green eyes. We also know that Eric/Cam has green eyes. We're just going to focus on those two for now because there's some minor characters in there that have green eyes. But I think, what was it? Quinn has green eyes. We're not talking about her. We believe that Imogen is one of King Tauri's children. We think she is Eric/Cam's sister, and we think they are related. Now, what other evidence do we have? Not much, but we do have one line where they're going to Jacinia when they're about to, I believe, break into the
vault,
into the vault, and Jacinia looks up and looks at Eric and kind of gets wide-eyed, and she realizes like who he is, that he is the king's son. And Violet and Jacinia start talking about it, and Jacinia says, I mean, well, you can tell if you're looking. You can see the resemblance. You can tell if they're looking, something like that. Yeah, that could be about the king and Eric, but we also think maybe she sees Imogen standing right there and can see some sort of a resemblance between Eric and Imogen with those green eyes. That's one of the things we think that is hidden. That's one of the family secrets we think is going on. We think there's a chance that Imogen is one of King Tauri's children. Also, did I miss anything on that? Was there any other evidence you had on that one?
No, we are just delulu about it.
We've completely lost it, but we do know that video had something in it, and we got two messages out of it, and that was one of the two main messages.
Yes.
Moving on real quick, we're pretty sure Quinn is a betrayer.
Yes.
We are pretty confident that Quinn is using her astral projection excuse during this archive chase, during this vault chase, where she says she was like, oh, I got to take a walk as Violet, I got to take a walk as Rhiannon, but Imogen, I couldn't mock your hair color, so I didn't go as you. We think instead she was going to report what was going on, because all of a sudden Nolan shows up at this, what was it, flight field or something, wherever Xaden just took off with the book, and Violet still has her tan rucksack with Lyra's journal in it. And that's just interesting because he says, oh yeah, the alarms went off. Well, if the alarms went off, why would Nolan be walking up with lemonade? It was just super, super weird, but we think that somebody narked, and we think it was Quinn. Not to mention, we know Imogen tells Quinn a lot of stuff. Quinn is not a marked one. And we know Imogen has mentioned that she's like, oh, Violet knows, and Quinn. Or like Rhiannon and Riddick and Sawyer know, but also Quinn. Like, that wasn't in the original thing. So we know that they're close, and maybe Quinn's just trying to get close to Imogen so she can know what's going on. So we definitely think that Quinn could be a little backstabber.
Yes, I don't trust her. I think it's very weird that she's walking around looking like people, that she can get Violet's silver hair right, but not Imogen's hair. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't trust it. And yeah, she's the only one that Imogen really confides in. That's not a marked one. And so it does set off some little bit of like, alarms in my mind. And I think the other people in Violet's circle are pretty solid. They wouldn't betray it. We've got Rhiannon, who's not going to betray. We've got Riddick, who's not going to betray, and Sawyer, who I definitely don't think is either. He wouldn't do that to Jacinia. So I don't think that's going to happen. So those are our miscellaneous theories, but let's get to the big ones. We've held off for a long enough time. Let's talk about the moment you all
want to hear.
Let's talk about Violet and that second signet. We have been trying to figure this out for 3 reads, and we have a couple theories. I would like you to give your theory about one, and because this is the one that you feel like you're probably most in line with.
I do. I feel the strongest about this one. And this is a pretty common one that's brought up. And that's, of course, that Violet is a truthsayer, meaning she can detect when somebody is lying. Now, things we know about Violet's second signet. It's not much. But we do know from an interview that Rebecca Yarros said that Violet's second signet has started to show in Iron Flame. She also said that everything you need to know about Violet's second signet is in Iron Flame.
Yes.
Okay. So basically we have to scour Iron Flame. Anything that may be showing up in Fourth Wing wouldn't necessarily be a presentation of the signet, but could be a hint at something that she needs. We know that signets at their core are what the writer needs the most. That is something that is said, that it is something that the writer needs the most at its core, I believe is the line.
Sure.
So what does Violet talk about needing all the time? She always says things like, I need the truth, or I need you to be truthful. She's always trying to find out what Xaden is telling, like, is it the truth? Is he telling her everything? Not to mention the blurb on the back of Onyx Storm says at the very end, Violet is on the hunt for the one thing she needs the most, the truth. So all of those are huge indicators. We know that Violet has always needed the truth. What also supports this, in my opinion, is when Rebecca says that everything you need to know about Violet's second signet is in Iron Flame. That means we've at least know how the signet works. And we know how truth saying works because the 2 was it infantry or riders? I think it was infantry or something. No, it have to be riders.
No, they're riders. Yeah,
they have to be riders. Right, that are with Varrish. Every time he asks her to empty out the contents of her bag, they're always there. And they talk about how they are truthsayers, how they can detect when somebody is lying. She's in the interrogation room when Violet's squad is taking in for interrogation, and they talk about how they're able to detect bodily functions or something along those lines, where they say we're able to detect bodily functions to tell if somebody's lying or not. To me, that sounds like you can read somebody's heart rate, because what happens when you lie? Your heart rate increases usually. So to me, that's what that means by bodily functions. You maybe your respiration start to increase. Maybe you start to sweat. Those are all bodily functions that indicate that somebody is lying. And I think that's what they are referring to. We see a lot of instances, especially in Iron Flame, when Violet talks about heart rate, like her heart rate increasing, my heart drops to the bottom of my chest, which is all stuff about her, but it's all stuff that's like maybe she's starting to become more and more aware of her own bodily functions. Sure. She also says that there were 2 big lines for me that showed up at the very, I guess in the mid to end of Iron Flame, at the meeting with General Melgren and Lilith there. Violet says, when Xaden is talking, Violet says, Xaden said, blah, 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 blah. He lies, basically. He lied to them, saying, like, she knew, which, of course, she knows that he lied because she knows the truth. But the fact that she said, oh, yeah, he said that and he lied to them, just makes it seem like maybe you could tell, maybe she could tell in a different way that he was lying. She also says the same thing about Mira later on. She's like, oh, Mira lied right away, that she, when she was talking, I believe, to Lilith. And those 2 things secured it for me. Like, okay, she is actively acknowledging when somebody else is lying. Those are the biggest pieces of evidence that I personally think are indicators that Violet could be a truthsayer. But I'm also not a believer that she only has 2 signets, because I do think there is something else to it. I know, Whitney, you always say your biggest thing is, why would, after all of this, Violet be a truthsayer when it's a signet we've already seen before? We at least know of, I believe, 3 other minor characters that are truthsayers, because we also meet another one at Tecarus's place when they meet one of the guards that's a truthsayer, and he asks them to tell them a truth and to tell if like they're lying or not. Mm-hmm. And Mira goes like, I'll rip your head off if you touch my little sister. He's like, okay, you pass. So why would she have this semi-common signet? But what we also know is that the only signet more dangerous than an intrinsic is a truthsayer. That is said in an excerpt, I think right before we find out that Xaden is an intrinsic, if I'm not mistaken. That is, which Rebecca has also said she regrets putting that line in, but I think it's an important one. Like, if she's so dangerous, like if the only other thing is she's not obviously going to be an intrinsic with Xaden, so maybe she's the other most dangerous signet out there is a truthsayer. So I do believe that, but I also think she could potentially have another little signet in there somewhere. So what other possibility do we have?
Yeah, I am actually on the fence, because for a long time I did think, yeah, it has to be truth-saying. I absolutely thought that a truth-sayer would be what Violet was until my 3rd read-through. And I kept seeing things about Violet and her control that really got me thinking. From the first book, Violet is really good at controlling. It's almost as if she has used lesser magic before she is even a writer, and she even has a signet and the ability to use that lesser magic. We see that she's able to block out the fear. She compartmentalizes pain the way that she would use her archives in her mind, where she pushes back all that power. We see that she's very much into control. She very much needs control throughout the books, because either she's very powerful or she's in a lot of pain. She needs to push past it. She needs to have control with her anger, and she's not always great at that, and her jealousy. So that started standing out to me. And yeah, that the signet is a combination of the power that your dragon gives you. Scale is actually the one that tells them that, and that individual need of the writer. Throughout 4th Wing, but also especially in Iron Flame, we hear control, 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 control. So I started thinking, and I wasn't fully on board with this until I got to a spot in Iron Flame where Violet was talking to Felix, and it's on page in your Kindle. I'll just give the Kindle because it you probably have that. It's 535 and 536 in your Kindle. I'm going to pull it up in this book here and read it to you, because it just stood out to me so much that I needed to. It started to solidify things for me. So she's talking to Felix, and he's telling her that Carr never really helped her to hone in on her signet, her signet being lightning wielding. And she's asking him why he wouldn't do that if she was his best weapon. And he says, I think he's scared shitless of you. And he's saying, after all, you took half of their cadets without even a plan. You brought down Bazgayath on a fucking whim, no less. His laugh is a little more incredulous than mocking this time, but it still rubs me the wrong way. And she says, I didn't do that. Xaden did that. And he says, he hunted riderless wyvern, deposited them on Melgren's front door, and exposed Navarre's greatest secret to the border outpost before noon, Felix agrees. But you were the one who demanded he give the cadets a choice. In that moment, you wielded him, our unyielding, uncompromising, headstrong heir apparent. And this got to me. It was like, I don't know, 9 o'clock at night. I'm texting Megan. I was like, oh my God, I think I got it. I think I got her second signet. And I am firmly in the camp that her second signet is control. Control of some kind, whether it's control of herself, control of others. And I do believe it extends to others, because we're hearing about the fact that she controls. She really does. She has a lot of power for somebody who is weak in their own right. Physically, she's really weak. She's very powerful as a writer, but she doesn't have a lot to her, and people don't really like her too much because she's a Sorrengail. So she wouldn't have that sway because of, her name necessarily, especially at Basgayath, and people gravitate towards her. There is a sense of control there, and there's a sense that she can kind of wield this room. And we see it in the final battle at Basgayath. We see that all she's saying she needs is control. I need control. I need control. You hear it maybe 30 times in that battle. A lot. And so what does she need the most? I think she needs control of the situation. She says she needs truth, but everybody else realizes that control is what she needs. She needs control over her signet, her lightning wielding. That is the one thing they're working on the whole time. She needs control over her, keeping her all of the secrets and her shields. So she needs all this control more than absolutely anything else in the world. So when I read that in the third time through, I was like, oh my gosh, this could definitely be her signet.
100%. And you even hear from the dragons. Like, I think Taryn says, you command the skies and things like that. Like, maybe that's insinuating that she commands the skies, meaning she commands everything. She can kind of control everything to a certain extent. That would be a very unique signet. And again, we have to see kind of what that specifically looks like as a signet. Because I'm sure we can't just say, oh, she just controls everything. Like, then she'd be a god, which who knows, maybe she is. But no, I think you're totally right. Once you said that, it definitely clicked that she does. She needs control. Like, she thinks she needs the truth, but maybe what she really needs is control, because that's what everyone seems to be telling her. Like, you need to figure out how to control your shit. So I think that's definitely a very, very big possibility.
There is something to say too about the dragon that is giving her that signet. And Andarna is in control. She is a den leader. She is in control even when we don't think she is. We find out that she was the one that said, I'm gonna go to threshing and I'm gonna bond, and nobody else could say no to her because she is a very powerful dragon in her own right. And Violet could, because that signet comes from the dragon's power that they give you and what you need. So it's a mixture of both. I see that as being a huge tell, but also Violet controls dragons. She controlled Coda at one point.
Dude, she straight up talks to other dragons and doesn't get her head blown off. Like, she has some sort of other...
Something's going on.
There is definitely something going on with her and her relationship to the dragons too. But I think you're right on the nose. Which is why now I'm like, okay, well, she must have 3 signets, because I'm just so sold on both of them. Not to mention, we do have a couple other theories out there on her second signet that do also speak to me too. Like, obviously we see lots of thoughts and hints at her being a distance wielder. Like, that's a very common thing out there. She's fast. Every time she's on Taryn and it's supposed to be a 12-hour flight, it was a 10-hour flight. Like, can she get from point A to point B quicker than everybody else? Like, can she do that? They also talk about not having a distance wielder in like hundreds of years or something. Like, that was very intentional as well. There's also the idea that Andarna essentially gifted her ability to stop time to Violet when Violet pulled too much at Resin, and accidentally pulled so much, because there are lines where it says, they, like, what does this say about Feathertails? Or they don't bond to writers because they can accidentally gift their magic to them. Well, what if that's exactly what happened, and that's why Violet can still kind of manipulate time? Like, in the final battle at Basgayath, she's counting the seconds, second 1, this happens, second 2, this happens, and she does that several times in the final battle there. So is she still kind of doing something with time, and does that like work in tandem with your theory of control? Because maybe now, like, can she control time with that? Are they one and the same? Are they 2 different things? I don't know, but there is definitely a lot that speaks to me about the potential ability for Violet to still be able to stop time. Not to mention when Andarna addresses it, Andarna says, I can no longer stop time. She does not say we can no longer stop time. She says, I can no longer stop time. And Violet is also worried when Andarna is asleep, when Violet wakes up, and they're talking about why she's asleep. And they say, from the energy usage, we forced her to grow. In Ressin, she stopped time for too long. I forced her to grow. And that's what Violet says. So maybe that is insinuating that that did happen, that she used too much and Darna accidentally gifted her power to Violet, which is what they say literally happens and why Feathertails do not bond. So that is still another strong possibility for me. So at this point, I just think Violet has 6 signets.
There you go.
That's the only plausible answer.
That's the only answer. Rebecca, make it happen.
She has all the signets.
Yes. So let's move on because we will sit there for hours talking about Violet's second signet. Let's talk about Xaden, and our one major theory that we need to talk about before this book comes out, because I think we will probably either be right or debunked in this book. So let's get it out there before
one of those things happens.
Out. Yes, and that is the theory that Xaden is not the only Ryerson. Or maybe not an only child. Not an only child. I think that's a good way to say it, because we're not positive how this happens.
Full sibling situation or a half sibling, but we do think
he has a sibling. And I think we know his sibling. Megan, would you like to tell us who his sibling might be?
Yeah, I think that Xaden and Bodhi are brothers. And I'm not sure if Xaden or Bodhi knows this. And there are a lot of little things that get brought up about Bodhi specifically and Xaden specifically that lead me to believe this. Starting with several descriptions of Bodhi. At the beginning of Fourth Wing, she says, Xaden's cousin Bodhi, she continues to talk and she goes, I'm struck again at how closely he resembles a softer version of Xaden. So we already see some sort of a resemblance between Bodhi and Xaden, and it's described as a softer version of Xaden. Later, that was at the beginning of Iron Flame, not Fourth Wing. Later in Iron Flame, on page 119 in your Kindle, 94 in the paperback, she says, Bodhi, she's talking about Bodhi again, and she says, his walk is so similar to Xaden's stride. Later, on page 148 in the Kindle, 120 in the paperback, Bodhi was and still is the closest thing I have to a brother. And that was in the excerpt at the beginning of the chapter. Bodhi was and still is the closest thing I have to a brother. So just in those 3, it makes me think that maybe there's something more to this resemblance between Bodhi and Xaden. And it's not just cousins, because sure, cousins can have a resemblance, but not such a strong resemblance to where Violet is picking up on it all the time, to where they have the same mannerisms. And I believe, Whitney, you also caught a couple other things when she's talking to Xaden about this.
Yeah, in Fourth Wing, as they are trying to get to, Violet, Xaden doesn't care to get to know Violet, I guess. But when Violet's trying to get to know Xaden, and she's asking him things like, do you like, what type of food do you like? And he's like, chocolate cake, stop being weird, which is one of my favorite lines. I think it's so funny.
It's cute.
But she asks him, do you have any siblings? And he's kind of just like sits there for a minute. And he's like, no, why? Like, why are you asking me this? Like, I think he probably thinks that she would know, because she knows all this stuff. She's read all the reports. So everybody, it's common knowledge. He's Fen Ryerson's only child. So, he's like, no, why? Why are you asking me this? So that was one point that really got to me. I'm like, are you sure? Like, are you sure about that? It's very intentional that Rebecca puts like only child.
Yes.
And there was a Iron Flame when Violet wants to tell Mira when they're at Samara about everything, about the Venin and everything. She says, Xaden could never understand. He doesn't have a sister. But maybe he has a brother.
It
was very intentional. It wasn't Xaden doesn't have any siblings. It was Xaden doesn't have a sister. Those were the little tells, but I do believe that Xaden and Bodhi are brothers. And I think that there's a reason to believe that maybe Xaden doesn't know, maybe Bodhi doesn't know, maybe it's a secret kept from all of them. And that could be a very important secret,
I agree. I don't think they know. I think if they did know, Xaden wouldn't be talking so much about being an only child. But yeah, I think that there's something there for sure.
Sure, absolutely.
I can't wait to find out more.
I can't wait. And there are still things we don't know. Like we said, these are our theories that we have really thought are the most important ones that we've come up with, the things that we think are most important. So there are still things that we keep asking ourselves about. There's still questions that we have. We had a whole list of questions when we got through our third reread. And so, there are still things that we want to know. And some of those questions we want to put out there for you. So I'll start and we'll just go back and forth and tell you some of our questions that we still have. First and foremost, why did everyone think Xaden's grandfather was his great uncle? Why was that a thing? Why are we hearing about it? Why was it put in? Rebecca, you're doing my brain in.
Yeah, and why has that also come up more than once? Because it also came up with Kat and what's her name's brother / cousin. Yeah, Serena / brother / cousin. So why is that still like a thing? Why does everybody not know everybody's relationship?
Exactly.
The other thing is, what is up with Violet's eye color? Violet's eye color is described to be like a hazel with shades of blue and amber. What kind of eye color is that? And when they're talking about like depending on her moods or the steaminess of the scenario, either the ambers come up more in her eyes or the blues come up more in the eyes. I want to know more about that, because the only other eye colors we know in the Sorrengail family are, we know Brennan's are amber and Mira's are brown. We don't know anything about Mama or Papa's eye color.
So that's one thing that hopefully it'll be addressed. It probably won't be addressed till the 5th book, just because we're going to be tortured with it. But the next question is, what is the prerequisite for drawing from the earth? Could anybody do it? Yeah. Do you have to be a writer? Do you have to be a flyer? What is the prerequisite? Because we just don't know. We don't know if it's a possibility that infantry will now all become Venin. Who knows?
Yeah, it's very possible. That is actually something that would change all of our theories, is if we knew the prerequisite for that. When and why did Imogen erase Violet's memories? Because Rebecca Yarros hinted that it may have happened already. Yeah. When and why?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it would really change a lot of the things that are happening. We have an unreliable narrative here, and an unreliable narrator, and it's fun because we only get her viewpoint, and her viewpoint is, Violet's obviously viewpoint, but what are we not seeing, and how would that change the story for us? So it's an interesting thing. Why is Nasya always sleeping outside the archives? What is
she's supposed to be the guard of the archives or something, and she's always sleeping? Like, what? Is she really sleeping? I don't know.
Makes no sense.
What is the everything that Lyra and Nowlin paid for when they did whatever it is they did? Like, both Nowlin and Lyra are said to have lost everything, or it cost them everything when they did whatever they did. Nowlin being trying to save Brennan, and Lyra voicing her opinion that this information on sharing how to build the Wardstone and how to activate the Wardstone should be shared. It said she spoke her voice and it cost her everything. What is that everything? What happened?
What's up with the number 20? It is in everything.
This drives me nuts.
It's 20 feet, 20 this, 20 that. Why is that number 20 so big? They are 20 years old when they go to Basgayath. What is up with the number 20?
20 minutes, 20 yards, 20 degrees, 20 strikes. Like, that number is everywhere in this dang series.
Yeah.
Where did Mira see Tirish runes before she saw them on Violet's daggers? Because when she sees Violet and Violet has her Tirish runed daggers, Mira comments and is like, "Are those runes?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, like Xaden gave them to me, whatever." And she's like, "Wow, I haven't seen Tirish runes like those in ... a while." Okay, well, where the hell did you see them before that? Like, I felt like that was an interesting, like, it wasn't like, oh, I haven't seen those since I was in school. It was ... a while.
And finally, the question that has been driving me insane: where is Tervain on the map? If you look at the maps in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, Tervain is where Liam and Xaden were fostered after the rebellion and after their families were executed, and it is not on the map at all. It is nowhere to be found, and it is supposed to be the place. It is a place. It's not a person. Tervain is a place. Now, Llewellyn is on the map, and all I thought was Llewellyn was a person, but it is on the map, but Tervain is not. Are they interchangeable? I don't know, but it is something that has kept me up at night. Yeah.
Yeah. We scoured that map a lot. Couple other random questions that we didn't get to talk about earlier is how did Julianne get her mark? We talked about her briefly when she was the youngest marked one who was still in utero, I believe, when this whole thing happened. But how was she born with the mark? How was she even born if her parent was executed? Did her mother not get executed? Like, I have lots of questions on that. And just, of course, all of how did the relic work and all of that. So those are some of our most burning questions for our adventure through the rest of the Empyrean series.
And so, Meg, to close, what are you most excited about as we get closer to, we have less than a month until Onyx Storm comes out. What are you most excited about with Onyx Storm? What are you looking forward to?
I'm going to be very simple and say I want to know the exact details of Violet's second and or third signet. Like, that is what I'm most excited for to read in Onyx Storm. And of course, just to see Zaddy again. And I just want to make sure he's okay.
Oh, I know. I miss him. I think
What
that's
about
where
you?
I'm at too. That's where I'm at too, I think. I think that I am most concerned, how is this signet going to affect the rest of the story? Is it going to help Xaden? Because now we know he's Venin, and I'm so sad. And what is the implications of it? Has it been helping? Did it cause him to pull from the earth? We're not even going to get into that because that'll take us for another hour.
I know.
but you know, there's a lot of questions around that. So I'm really looking forward to maybe answers in this book. I'm most looking forward to maybe Xaden's mom coming into this book.
Yes.
We haven't learned much about her, but she's full of mystery. And I think that hopefully we'll see her in book 3 in Onyx Storm. So I'm looking forward to that.
Totally agree. And I'm hoping that we see her because she's in the Isle Kingdoms and because we get to go to the Isle Kingdoms, because I do totally believe that that's where we're headed. So definitely some big ones. And obviously just finding out more about Papa Sorrengail's research.
Yes, we have a lot of questions, a lot of things, and I think that we will at least get some of them, hopefully more,
Yes.
but some of them answered in the next book. That's all I got, Megan.
That's all I got.
It's been hours. We've been here theorizing. I hope people are still with us listening in and they're enjoying our theories and that they have their own. Maybe we've answered some questions for them. Maybe you have your own. If you do, come stop by our Instagram page and our threads and come leave them for us. We'll put up a threads and a post on Instagram so that you guys can leave them in the comments and talk to us and tell us what you thought about our theories. But yeah, I am just excited. We've got like 22 days or something like that until this book
Onyx
comes
Storm.
out. So
Can't wait. So excited. I'm so excited to hear all of your guys' theories as well. And looking forward to 2025 and what the new year brings us.
yeah, we're almost there. Happy New Year. And we'll see what happens next. And we'll see if we got any of these right. Probably half or less that we actually got right. But,
probably. I'm usually wrong.
Yes, and we will be in on our first and second reads of Onyx Storm because we know we're going to need a vibe read and a deep dive, and then we'll come back and we'll give you our thoughts on Onyx Storm after we've read, and we're just so excited to share those with you. We'll be back next week with MK Ahern as she talks about her new release, Warring Tides, that comes out in February, and we're so excited about that. So we will see you next week on What They Wrote podcast. Bye.